Welcome to our National Conversation, a podcast in which we discuss politics from all angles. We are completely nonpartisan, and all views, respectfully stated, are welcome here. Our podcast is unique in that it is hosted and run by students who are focused on finding solutions to the biggest problems facing America.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of Allow Us to Explain. My name is Delaney, and I serve as one of the podcast interns here at ONC. As schools around the country get ready to reopen, we are going to focus on a subject impacting a number of classrooms and education curricula. Books are starting to be banned from teacher discussions or from being read in general. So where does this leave our students and teachers, and how can we move forward? Today, we are joined by our governance team lead, Devan Peters, social issues intern, Natia and a teacher, Ashley Delaney. Starting with our guest, would Miss Ashley Delaney like to introduce themselves?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ashley Delaney. I teach 8th grade middle school English in, I don't know, I guess part of me was like, do I actually say the county that I work in? But I work in a county in Maryland. And the last couple of years, we've been not having issues, but like there have been some protests outside of central office about books, or at least about the books that certain kids are reading. And it's been really interesting to just kind of like look at all of it. Like I studied English in college, so the progression of banned books from where they were before to like where we are now with the political landscape and everything, it's like been really interesting to me. So I'm really excited to be on this panel to talk about it.
Moving on to our ONC interns, Devan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. One, thank you for joining us, Ms. Delaney. I appreciate you, your time and the discourse that you'll offer to the conversation here. But yes, no, I am the governance intern or team lead for here at ONC, and I'm just overall happy to be here.
Thank you. And Natia.
Hi, my name is Natia. I'm a social issues intern here at ONC. I'm also a substitute teacher in my free time, so I can also kind of give in my experience from being a substitute and dealing with students and the educational atmosphere. So I'm excited to be here.
All right, so let's jump into it. Let's start with the history of banned books. Does someone want to talk about how book bans started coming in conversation, how it is becoming prevalent, more and more increasing with time?
I think I could jump in initially. Overall, there's been an extensive history pertaining to book banning in the United States. You could draw back to the Civil War, where any abolitionist criteria or rhetoric or any memoirs or novella that were pertaining to like northern movements within the South, at least, were completely banned throughout that time. During the Jim Crow era, the Daughters of the Confederacy had outlawed any textbooks that pertains to that were not aligning with the ideology of the Confederacy of the time, along with McCarthyism in the 50s. So there's been some stark history within the United States, and it's only bled even further nowadays. Just the topics of discussion now. Basically, it's transitioned to a different type of boogeyman, as in like the McCarthyism of the 50s was one where communism and socialism was outlawed, Jim Crow era, and the abolitionist or rhetoric that was not apologetic to the Confederacy was outlawed. And now today we see a pretty enhanced movement against that of LGBTQ plus and critical race theory criteria that is being kind of subjected at the moment.
The only way that I can think about book banning, it's not something that is talked about a whole lot, at least when I was in college and like, you know, studying English and studying books and things like that. But I was thinking about when you were mentioning the types of books that were banned at any certain time, and then like just general books that are banned all over the country for almost like weirdly asinine reasons, but for given the background of that particular space, like I get it. So like how Huckleberry Finn is banned in like almost every state ever just because it uses the N-word like 400 times. And then I was like, well, it was written in like 18 something or other, and Missouri.
Right, it's a product of its time.
Right, like it's one of the, and so I always wonder what the difference is between people being angry about the book existing presently versus the time of when it existed. Because like there's all those books that were banned during McCarthyism about communism and stuff like that we can fully read right now and no one cares. But like how much of it is people being angry that it's a product of a time that they just didn't live in and now we know is an issue? Like how many people are reading with the lens that they should, which is it was not problematic then. It's problematic now. Let's talk about why it's problematic now, because I think that's part of understanding the depth of the text.
Right. That is the issue to harp on, is the extent to which you should dive into it, like completely, like subjectively speaking. And yeah, like Huckleberry Finn, for instance, yes, like it obviously has derogatory language as exceptionally racist rhetoric. But again, yes, it's a product of its time. It's also like a lens into the cultural landscape of what was considered just normalized within that time frame. And it's I would personally consider it educational to examine it, because it obviously illuminates into what is not normalized today and what shouldn't be normalized, and it's just allows us to get a richer like encapsulation of like history overall.
Oh yeah, because like how many books are literally just a literal window into the time period of which they were written? Like so much literature that was, you know, the Gothic Victorian stuff that was written, and we got to learn all about what was going on in England at the time. It wasn't a secret, but it was fascinating to see, you know, like this cultural understanding of this country at the time. And even now, like I think it's just important. I think it's an erasure of history if you try to ban books like that because they're a problem at the moment.
I completely agree. It is a form of censorship too, in my opinion, personally speaking. It is diluting the space in which certain, at least as in today, certain marginalized groups, already marginalized groups, are being suppressed even further through the apparatus of literature, basically speaking.
Yeah, I agree. I think with history is like we learn history so we don't repeat it. And literature is the same way. Is we learn to grow and become better than who we are at this current state of mind. It's to expand our knowledge, and if we reduce that and pursue a reductive approach of our education, I think it hurts us in the meantime, because we just go back and repeat things that happened in history, in a sense, especially when we look at sociocultural norms. Is we're growing at a certain period of time right now socially. Of course, we always are, but I think the past couple of decades have really shown a dramatic change in how we view LGBTQ, that community, how we value people of color. And I think it's a general changing time, and reducing literature to not show that or explain that, I think, is harming us overall.
And it's also de-appreciating students, at least contemporary students, and their ability to acknowledge certain cultural windows, I guess you could say, within subgroups. Like, for instance, based on most of my research that I did, there's been a multitude of books. We're talking, I don't know if you guys know the numbers within contemporary. I'll just read off a small paragraph that I'd written, at least initially. But as of this contemporary window, as of the early 2020s, the action of book banning has seen a stark resurgence in its utilization. In 2022 alone, we saw up to 2,571 unique titles banned throughout the United States. In 2023, as of now, there have been 1,471 book ban instances, with around 871 titles affected by these actions. This is coming through PEN America. And according to the American Library Association, between 2020 and 2022, the number of individual titles banned spiked more than 1,100% from 223 to the 2,571 number that was previously acknowledged. And obviously, the majority of these novels and memoirs, or just texts in general, are LGBTQ plus based. Other targets include storylines that are based around race and racism in Florida, state that I reside in. a biography on Hank Aaron has been temporarily outlawed. And the most frequently banned book of 2022 and 2023 is Maya Kobabe's Gender Queer, which is a memoir about what it means to be binary. So, or non-binary, excuse me. So that just gives you like a little bit of a quantitative lens as to like the extent of what we're dealing with now. There's, like I said, there's been a stark resurgence specifically within the past. And it's just a little disheartening to see, to say the least.
I had heard about that genderqueer book. I don't remember where I saw information about that one, but I remember hearing about it because I don't know if we teach it in our county, but I don't know enough about it to say. But I'm not like surprised, which is the issue, but it's not like as in like I'm not surprised we're banning them. It's more like I'm not surprised at how they're being banned at the level of which they are, just because it's one of those like cases where I feel like not enough people are trusting people to do their jobs correctly, which I think is the biggest issue in regards to how it impacts education. Like, I'm a teacher, I'm a professional person. I went to school to learn how to teach a thing. So I would like you to please trust that I know how to do that. But then and then so many, like, I don't want to say like parents are being the worst, like, because like parents are doing what they feel like they'd have to do to protect their children. I just also feel like there's this insane amount of fear from parents that doesn't need to exist. And a lot of it is lack of trust with like professionals. Like, a lot of parents feel like, well, I don't trust that my teacher is going to teach my kid the values that we believe in. Okay, well, then you teach your kid the values that you teach at home. That's your job. Like, they live with you. My job is to teach them how to read critically and how to experience a world that they don't necessarily live in. Like, I always tell my kids, like, we read all these books because you're never going to be Tom Sawyer. You're never going to be Holden Caulfield. You're never going to be Maya Angelou. You're never going to be any of these people. So you should learn what it's like to be like them. And then that way you can be far more well-rounded when you're out in the world, where you meet people who are like them. And then you know what to do when you run into someone who is weirdly similar to Hamlet in the world, because you will, and he's going to annoy you. And you're like, okay, well, I know how to deal with this. And it's walk away and don't talk to him about his father. Like, it's stuff like that. So there's not enough trust happening where people are looking at teachers and being like, I trust my teacher to teach my kid and not indoctrinate them. Because like, that's why I don't tell my kids who I vote for. Like, I was like, that's none of your business. You don't need to know that. I'm not here to indoctrinate you. I'm here to teach you how to persuade people to do what you want. Like, that's it. There's techniques for that. That's what I got.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting to me the use of book banning as a tool to prevent children from reading, when I feel like when I was a student in English classes and everything, before we read books, we'd have to send a form home, basically, where the parents had to sign off on, okay, my kid can read these books, because some were very either controversial or explored kind of graphic or violent themes, or were even classic books that we kind of always read. So it was more of or even ones that explored religious themes, because especially when we get into religion, is some kids don't want to be parents don't want to be exposed to certain religions, and so we'd always get a form sent home of like, okay, can your kid read these books, sign off on it, and if not, then the teacher would find something else for that student to do and read a different kind of book, do different activities. And sure, it could affect their learning because they're not doing whatever the class is doing, but at the same time, there's an alternative choice that kind of solves the issue. So it surprises me that something like that, as simple as that, isn't the just norm, and instead we're going to the vast extreme of, let's just ban the book entirely so no one can read it. So I think it's a vast extreme that also is very controlling in a sense, because if one parent, or like, let's say 5 different parents or 5 different families say this book is bad, we need to ban it, then they ban the book, then what about all those other families who are actually like, actually, I'm fine with my kid reading this. So no one can read it. It's just exercising control over a populace, and without consideration that maybe not everyone feels that way. So I think it's an extreme notion indeed.
did within research too, I did find some polling, and the majority of Americans, it was around like 60. I don't have the number at the top of my head right now, or the link right now, but it was around like 60 to 65, maybe even pushing 70%, or the majority of Americans are like against book banning overall, or at least like
It's 70.
yeah, broadly speaking, at least. And even like the majority of it you would expect coming from like conservatives, which they are. Moms for Liberty, there's about like 115,000, like 57 chapters across 45 states, are a big champion of these book bans, like the abolition of pornography in schools, race theory, stuff like that. But like 60% of Democrats like voted or were like in favor or were against any form of book banning, and surprisingly enough, like 70% of conservatives were as well. So it's a general minority that is kind of pushing legislation, and then or like at least spewing the rhetoric to push legislation. And then obviously you have the majority of the states who are doing it, which are conservative leaning, at least, such as Florida, where I live, where they are going to certain extremes to just dilute the array of like literature that kids have access to from grades 3 to like 12, basically.
Ashley and Natia have experience in the classrooms having to have these conversations with students and with teachers, other teachers, and with families. So would either of you like to dive deeper into your experience teaching about banned books in curriculums with students, teachers, parents, any of the above?
So there was one year so not a lot of things I think are banned in my county. Like we can pretty much teach whatever we want. And one year we were teaching The Giver by Lois Lowry, which is banned by a lot of places. And in particular at the time, I think it was banned in Texas. And I think it was banned for its depiction of suicide, but it's like the weakest depiction of suicide ever, because it's kind of like a paragraph in the middle of like chapter 19 that's like, oh yeah, she just said she would do it herself. And it was like, if you know what she's doing, then yes, you understand that that's what had happened, but like it wasn't like a graphic description of anything. And so I didn't even realize that was why it was banned in a bunch of places until I think maybe like 2 months ago when I was talking to a cohort partner about it, because we still teach it. But there was one year that I was teaching it, and I remember to get middle schoolers to read anything, you kind of have to trick them. And so I was like, guys, we're going to read The Giver. It's banned in a bunch of states. It's like an illegal book. We're reading something so cool that it's illegal. And all the kids are like, oh, that's so cool. And then like one kid went home and told her mom that I was having the kids read a book that was not legal. And so her mom called me, or she asked me to call her. And she was like, yeah, I had a feeling that she was being really dramatic about it. It's fine. She's going to read The Giver. Like it was really one of those things that was like, I played it up really bad, so that was my fault. But I loved that she went home and then her mom was like, what is happening in your school? And then she called me and it was fine. So the kid ended up reading the book and she loved it. But I just think about how that I've never otherwise had a really big issue where somebody was like, no, my kid is not reading this book. But I've heard that it happens at the high school level, because at the high school level, the kids get to read Night by Elie Wiesel. And that book has a lot of graphic descriptions of death. And the Holocaust. And so some kids, I think, were able to opt out of it. But I've also heard recently that, like you were talking about, Natia, our county, I think, just got rid of the opt-out system. Like, I think we had one and now it's gone. And so they found that out and they're really angry about it. And I think that's why they keep protesting.
I mean, as like substitute, I talked to a bunch of teachers. I also used to teach at my local high school and middle school clarinets, and so I got to like have sit down with the teachers and talk about how it is teaching and whatnot. And I think surprisingly, because I live in North Carolina, so it's largely conservative, we haven't had a problematic issue of like, oh, we need to censor all of this content. Which is really surprising to me, but I'm kind of thankful for it. And even the books that I've seen, because with elementary school students, when I've taught them, I've always looked through their books because they do a lot of reading in class, and I've never seen anything where I'm like, oh, that shouldn't be there. It's like, it's a normal kid's book. So I think a lot of it seems extreme in a sense, but I'm surprised that like the opt-out system is no longer a thing for some areas, because I think that was like, I feel like that's like the biggest compromise to fix anything for kids and parents is like, okay, if you don't want your kids to read it, then they don't have to read it. But like, it shouldn't be a thing where the whole class can't read the book. So I think that's a surprising thing to see.
Usually when we're assigning books, like this is one of the reasons why I feel like it's mildly annoying as a teacher when I'm teaching a book to maybe like 29 students and then 2 of them can't read it. So it's like, well, great, now I have to create a whole bunch of stuff for these 2 kids. Which like I understand is like, you know, like it's the compromise and it's good. I've never had to do it, but I can imagine that for a lot of teachers, on top of all the other things you would have to do, it's kind of annoying to have that. But I've also learned that in my county, they seem to err with the philosophy of do it now, apologize later. Which is like also what all the teachers in the county do. So like the county's just sitting there enforcing this mentality, and so we all do it. So it's like, here's the book we're reading, and the kid's like, do we have a choice? No. So like everybody's reading The Outsiders, everybody's reading Chasing Lincoln's Killer, everybody's reading A Midsummer Night's Dream or something else, and it's just like, that's just how that's going to work. You can say no, but like you're just not going to read it anyway because you're 12 and you don't want to. So like a lot of times I don't have to deal with a parent being like, I don't want my kid to read this, because the kid just won't read it. And I'll be like, my hands are tied. It's not my fault anymore.
Yeah, I think also what shocks me too is talking to students one-on-one. They say some of the craziest stuff, and sometimes you gotta like take it with a grain of salt, or sometimes they're actually like there's a hint of truth to it. And the one thing I found is a lot of kids have a little bit too much access to the internet. So I think the level of kind of hypocrisy that can be present within parents dealing with their kids. I mean, this is just coming from a teacher perspective, but because I'm not a parent myself, but it's shocking to say the least.
It's 100% true. I've pondered the same thing. Like, there's so many other forms of medium like access for like children in general, and I don't even like consider. I would not even expect children of that age demographic to be even like consuming like books that like religiously anymore, comparatively to like previous generations. And the majority of their time outside of the classroom is just on the internet or watching like movies. Like, I can attest, obviously, like I was like 12 or 14 at one point, and I was watching PG-13 rated R movies. Like, if you're gonna just outlaw like Huckleberry Finn or like Catcher in the Rye for like derogatory language that was used like in the 50s or whatever, like pre like 21st century like decade, then like you might as well ban like any Quentin Tarantino movie as well, because the N-word is spewed far across the span of those movies as well, just as they are in like some of these books. So
yeah, like he's way too comfortable writing that word into his script. It kind of stresses me out.
But exactly the pedigree that we're going with, at least. So it's just, I don't know, like book banning, it's I was going to ask from a teacher's perspective, what kind of topics or discussions do we genuinely think that is sufficient in order for us to ban technically for a school? Do we think that there are any specific topics that are that it's appropriate to actually like expel them from the curriculum, or do we just think that generally speaking it should be mostly all of it should be consumed?
I think it depends on how you teach it. Like, I'm thinking about when this was before they changed the curriculum, because in my county we had a curriculum change like 4 years ago, and before that we were teaching argument techniques, but we were using the Holocaust and propaganda to do it. So a bunch of like my 7th graders are like consuming the knowledge of Nazi Germany and 1940s America, and we're looking at like the Looney Tunes cartoons that they made where like Bugs Bunny is like chasing and shooting Japanese people who are horrendously caricaturally drawn, and like it's insane. And then we were looking at other texts, but the way that we did it, it wasn't sitting there being like, just so you know, everything in the poisonous mushroom is legit. It was more just like, this is how they wrote it, and we should talk about why this is messed up and why this convinced a whole bunch of children and adults that this was fine. And within that lens, a lot of the kids, first of all, that was the best unit ever, because all of a sudden, for the last 3 months of school, every kid was a lot nicer to each other all of a sudden. Like, they all learned about the Holocaust and all of its horrors and how it worked without anybody having an issue with it for the first like 8 years or so of like the reign of Nazi Germany. And so all the kids were like, that can happen. And I was like, children, it happens every day. And then I would show them like present day propaganda. And they were like, oh my God, we're being manipulated. It was so enlightening for a lot of them. And then they took it out of the curriculum and I'm still mad about it. But like, I think as long as you teach it with a lens of, we have to look at this very critically, not look at why it's right or wrong, but like, what is happening? What is the text actually literally trying to do? And then when you figure that out, they're allowed to decide for themselves whether or not that's bad. And that's the true meaning of critical thinking. And so I think it just depends on how you do it.
I agree. No, you're right, Ashley. I was going to say, in order to tackle like like authoritative or like anti-fascist like potential, like you kind of need to like root it out like early on. Like for me personally speaking, like I've even thought about like Mein Kampf specifically. I think like at an early age, maybe not, but I don't think it is completely inappropriate for us to use the critical thinking analysis of the rhetoric that is used within like that ideology specifically. You know what I mean? It's obviously detailed in there before any of like the power, like before like the Third Reich came to power per se. So it, like unraveling the text itself is also like, I would argue that it is appropriate, but within the like the earlier like grades, such as like 6th to 8th, maybe not yet per se. But if then again, like I was shown like Schindler's List in the 8th grade, if I recall correctly, 7th or 8th grade. So like if I'm consuming Schindler's List and like learning about the Holocaust, I guess Mein Kampf really isn't that too far of a step away from that. But I'm with you.
And I think like I remember as a student, I never really experienced a teacher teaching me in a way that was biased or that like held the political perspective. If they wanted to share their political perspective, they make it very clear head on, like, this is my perspective, you don't have to agree with me, but this is just how I think of things. And I think that's kind of the way to go about things. Like I've never encountered a teacher who wants to spew an ideology and force it down your throat. And I think that's kind of what some parents might think might be happening, but really it's like a teacher's job is to teach you how to exist and how to critically think and challenge what you see around you. And I think that's what teachers do. And sometimes you need more controversial text to kind of help fuel that knowledge and whatnot. Of course, with certain texts, you might need to have the knowledge to be able to analyze things a little bit more. But otherwise, I think with teachers and students, this idea that it's a political platform per se, and a political environment just doesn't seem to be reality. Unless there's, I mean, there might be a handful of teachers out there who shouldn't be teaching the way they should be, but for the most part, I feel like teachers just teach you how to be a human and how to function as an adult in society. So not so much of, here, let me force things down your throat and you have to accept it for what it is.
No, I fully agree with you. I do think that there's probably like 2 or 3 teachers who are ruining it for everybody in really weird remote parts of the country. And then everyone else is like, no, I'm here to get my measly paycheck and teach my child how to spell the word because. And that's it. Like, that's the whole reason I'm here.
Back to the idea that you proposed of opting out. At what extent would the opt-out system really allow students to stop reading that? Banned books kind of seem like a spectrum. We have some banned books that just need to be abridged versions to be in the curriculum, and then we have banned books that are completely not allowed at all. So at what point would you guys think that the opt-out system would work? Would it be students don't have to read certain chapters, or students don't have to read the whole book? Or how would the nuance of that opt-out system work?
I think it's what fundamentally the parent wants. I wouldn't expect a parent to look at a book a student's going to read and know exactly the contents of that book. Normally, from what I've experienced with the opt-out system, they kind of say, this book explores these themes, and do you want your kid to read that or no? So normally it's a full out opt out from reading the book entirely, but I feel like if the parent is wants something like, okay, I want my kid to be a part of the class and reading this book, but hey, like, I don't want them to explore this specific theme, then the teacher can maybe work on saying like, okay, this chapter or this certain page, because sometimes it's just a page in a book that's like a little controversial, then maybe they just don't read that page. So something like that, I think it's more a communication thing of, okay, if the parent has an issue, then they communicate that with the teacher, and the teacher sees what they can do on their side to kind of compromise and make the situation work. So that way it kind of works for everyone without outright banning a book.
Difficult to say, because, so like, you remember in Utah when they banned something, I don't remember what they banned, and then they had passed something where they said that in schools you couldn't read books that were like sexually pervasive or something like that. So then people countersued and were like, all right, well, we're gonna get the Bible banned because there's like so much sex in that. And then like all of the people in Utah like flipped out. They were like, wait, what? And then everyone was like, yeah, what now? I have no idea how that lawsuit has ended or if it ended at all. But I remember that happening, and then people started bringing up the idea that you could like opt out of reading certain things if you were queer. So it was like, well, if we don't ask the straight people or whatever, I think it was something like that. If we don't ask the straight people if they want to read like Hurricane Child, we shouldn't have to ask gay people if they want to read like The Great Gatsby, even though there's like suggestively queer things in that book as well. But it was like, what if we just allowed everybody to start opting out, and then it would just get crazy? So like, I do agree that there have to be some limits to an opt-out program if one exists at all, just because then otherwise it turns into anarchy. Like a kid would literally be like, I don't want to read the Odyssey because I don't feel like it. And also maybe it has some sex stuff in it. It's like, it does. But also I would opt out of reading the Odyssey just because it's boring. But it's one of those things where it's hard to know what the limit is for opting out. Like, do you only opt out of a chapter? Like we said, do you opt out of a whole book? Can you only do one book a year? Like it has to be something where you're fully aware of what you are losing when you opt out of that. Because one of the biggest things that teachers have to do is decide the purpose for reading. I'm not giving you The Outsiders because I want you to learn about gun violence in Topeka, Kansas. I'm giving you The Outsiders because I want you to understand how like life can affect people in certain ways, and how you grow up affects who you are as a person later. And so it depends on what lessons you're pulling out of it, I think. And I think a lot of parents and people who want to ban books miss that point entirely.
What limit is the being classified as a banned book? You talked previously about how that paragraph in The Giver marked it as an air quote banned book. So say that paragraph was abridged and no longer included, is The Giver no longer banned, or does it still have that label of a banned book?
I think it depends on where you're at, where you're teaching it, because The Giver also primarily is talking about how to accept the fact, like it's literally about accepting that bad things happen. Like historically, bad things have happened. We should know about those things so that we know how to prevent them. In the entire text, they're like, well, we have one guy who knows about every bad thing that ever happens, and we just go to him for advice all the time. And it's like, okay, sure, but also everyone's being assigned a spouse. That's weird. Everyone's being assigned a kid. That's also weird. You can't take food out of certain places. You can only have bicycles, and all of your jobs get assigned when you're 12 years old. Like there are so many things about about this book that are utopian in theory, but then in practice, like there's a reason why Jonas gets really overwhelmed and stressed out when this is happening. Yeah, you could take that part about Rosemary out, but then how many people would be mad about the fact that at the end of the book, he takes out the entire government in like a single day by leaving town? Or he decides that there's a whole bunch of issues in this particular government that are problematic and that people shouldn't live that way. Like his biggest issue is that no one has a choice in anything. And that's fair. But there are some governments who would be like, I don't want to give people a choice. If you give them a choice, they always pick the wrong one, which is like a literal quote from the book. Like Jonas says that. He's like, what if they pick wrong? And then it's like, well, who are you to decide if they pick wrong or not, Jonas? You're 13. Like, that's not up to you. That's not human. Like humans should be allowed to do things like that. So I think it depends on where you would be teaching the book, because I think up here in Maryland, no one would care. But if you were teaching it somewhere that really wanted to enforce the idea that you need to live a certain way, they wouldn't want you to read it no matter what Rosemary does in chapter 19.
I don't know if like it should be banned entirely, like personally speaking, like because there's a reason why these are like embedded into the curriculum, because they offer some sort of guidance or lessons, especially in the developing process of like young minds. So if there's any like if there's like a majority that has like an issue with a certain like novel, then like if there's a couple pages that are like within the text itself, then like we can remove those from the curriculum. But like I don't believe that, like, you know, for instance, this example here, I don't think the whole novel should be like taken out completely. Like it just seems it seems like we're jumping the gun a little bit too hard. And just to there's certain topics that are going to be like tough for like kids to digest initially, but like they're kind of like essential within the learning process, so that way we can like alleviate any circumstances from like repeating themselves in the future.
Another book once, it was like Monster, and I don't remember who wrote it, but it's a book that's written like a screenplay where the main character is being accused of like being part of a murder, and he didn't actually have anything to do with it, but I think he was like in the area or something, and he got arrested for it. And the reason that we can't teach it in my county anymore is because it said it had like negative depictions of African Americans in it, even though the story takes place in like Harlem in like the 90s or something like that. And then I was like, I want to know who decided that, because if it was a white person who decided these were negative depictions of African Americans, that is bizarre. If it was a black person who said that, it's like that is an opinion I will accept, but because like I don't think anybody else could decide what that would be. Like, you know what I mean? Like it's really strange if that book was banned because a white person was like, this is uncomfortable and not a good description of black people. And I'd be like, I know like 6 black people like this. Like, what are you talking about?
There's a lot of there, but the thing is, there's a lot of like white people per se who are like banning a lot of these books. The whole critical race theory issue, you know, the past like year or two is like that's
right, like all of that.
Yeah, it's been the whole spiel is about making like not victim blaming, but it's about making like any students or just people of like the majority race feeling bad in quotations. And it's like, that's like misconstruing the narrative or like the point of the topic itself. It's not to make like individuals feel bad. It's to enlighten the youth on the systemic issues that are like currently present and what led to that. Like there's I've seen recently there's been some PragerU videos that are being introduced into schools now, like just videos in general. And I watched it the other day.
Is that like the cartoony one that I feel like I keep seeing all over Twitter where they're talking
I saw one of Frederick Douglass the other day, and he says something about I'll just say John was his friend. He was like, John was my friend. He was an abolitionist, blah, blah, blah. We were friends once, but then he got very aggressive with his rhetoric, whatever. And it led to potential like protests and riots and a building being burned down or two. And I'm not kidding. I'm dead serious. Like you can look it up, but this was like verbatim. There was he's talking to a white mother and a white child, and they both like roll their eyes and they're like, sounds familiar. And I'm like, I was like, wow. Okay. That is, it's just like, at that point, it's just not objective. You're just being subjective at that point. It's just like, okay, you're like acknowledging like, I won't even get to detail, but you're acknowledging like events of the past, but you are like, in a sense, kind of like applying a sort of like velvet wash over it that is like just directing kids into the wrong direction. I'd say it's just I don't know if it's entirely healthy per se is all.
I don't know if it's good to look at history with rose-colored glasses.
Exactly. Like it's like if we're gonna learn about the Holocaust, you gotta learn about the Holocaust, man. Like I learned about it like when I was 13 and I'm fine. Like it literally led to, like you said, it could have positive effects. Like you said, the last 3 months of class, most of the kids were relatively nice to each other. It's because, yeah, they understand the potential evils of the world and how far humanity could be driven if they go down a certain ideological path. We need to avert that at the best of our abilities. So any sense of restricting this is just, any sense of restricting any like pronounced like, I don't want to say progressive, just objective history. It's just probably it's probably going to have more negative effects than pros is all.
How are these books being decided to be banned? Is it the communities in these areas that are just protesting it until there's legislation? Do you think that it's the politics behind it that automatically out the gates have these books marked as banned? How does a book go through the process of becoming banned?
I don't actually know, but I'm sure there's paperwork involved. Like in the way that we have to like approve a book, because like even before we teach a book, we have to make sure that we can approve it. And the approval process, at least in our county, because I've done it before, is just like you literally fill out the document. You're like, why would you teach this? And then you just list like, boom, boom, this is why I'm teaching it. This is my purpose for reading, blah, blah, and then you're done. And then you send it to the county, and the county's like, yes, no, and that's it. Like they send it to like a council of teachers to read it, and then they decide if it's fine.
I do think that there are protests. I've seen it like where like parents go to board meetings and stuff like that, where they have like public conferences and whatnot. And I'm telling you, in Florida, it's been exceptionally prevalent in Florida and in Texas specifically. And then we had the whole story with Utah. Yes, I remember with the dumb counteracting it with the Bible, banning the Bible. But I do think that they that it was dismissed overall, and once the Bible was brought up to the table, they like scrapped the whole like situation. But no, a lot of it, but like following that, I think a lot of it is reactionary legislation. Like there's politicians, you know, specifically our governor, who's like running for president now as well, kind of went on a like little tangent or like a campaign within the educational sphere to please a constituency that he knows backs him, and even regardless if it was a small minority, was kind of like reactionary in a sense where they went out of their way to ban a multitude of books. And we've highlighted which books specifically. A lot of it has to do with LGBTQ plus community, which is obviously already being attacked legislatively speaking, regards to just their teachers' ability, at least in Florida, teachers' ability to talk about these things. You can't bring up whether or not you like have a relationship with the same sex, or you can't talk about non-binary people. You can't talk about these things, otherwise you could potentially be fired. So that, and just their lifestyles in general, are being attacked. And then that with critical race theory as well. So we already have like a marginalized group that is being further marginalized because of it doesn't follow along the ideals of a certain class or a certain subgroup at least. And it's not, I mean, I don't find it understandable, and I don't agree with their perspective on it. They can, since we live in a democratized state, they are allowed to, but should that be implemented within the system where it is kind of disillusioning the whole spectrum for which kids are able to have access to these just to this like criteria? I don't believe so, at least. I think it will lead down to a path where these marginalized groups will be even further marginalized, because kids are not going to be given the opportunity to become more inclusive at an earlier age. And then once they hit 19, 20, whatever, they're going to have these general biases that they formed over 7 to 8 years. And it's going to probably lead to more tension. So
we've talked about why it's important that books aren't banned, so we can have this conversation, start breaking down those stereotypes, the histories and whatnot. On the other hand, why would banning books be beneficial for communities?
Anything with pornographic material, like anything.
Right. I was like, I mean, at some point you become an adult, you can do whatever you want. But I don't think that like I guess there are books, I guess I don't think that I would teach a child like in the grade level that I teach, I suppose. Like it's like I don't think an 8th grader would be able to handle that. Like I wouldn't teach an 8th grader like the Iliad. I don't think they could do that. Like I think there's too many things in that book that are just stressful and like weird to read that they just
what's
wouldn't.
An example? Just curious. Yeah.
Well, like, so the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus, which is like super, 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 super queer, and like it's not even. It's one of those things where like you have, but it's never outrightly stated, so you kind of have to like understand why Achilles gets so upset when Patroclus dies, and then like ends up going on his massive rampage. And I feel like there aren't enough of my kids who would recognize that nuance in the text by being like, oh, he was bad because he loved him. He was like, oh no, they were besties, and also Achilles really likes to kill people. And I'd be like, I mean, yes, but like there's deeper meanings in all of these things. And there's other parts of that book, or at least other things that go through the book, like all of the Greek mythology. That's really hard because kids don't learn Greek mythology anymore. And so you would have to teach something like that. You would have to teach anything involving the Trojan War in general, which is extremely long. Like I gave some kid, my kids this year in one of my classes, they were mad. They were like, Miss Laney, we haven't been challenged enough. And I was like, all right. So I gave them some chapters from the Iliad, and they were like, we have no idea what this says. And I was like, you asked for this. So I will give you like 3 pages of context, and that's it. And all of the context was about Greek mythology. So like they understood the Trojan horse, and that was all they got out of it, which is fine because that was the point. But I think if it involves like 6 or 7 other texts to understand, I wouldn't give it to my 8th graders.
Class period isn't long enough for that. I'd assume your specific area is like you have to fit it into a window of like
like the class period is not long enough. The year is not long enough for the amount of things I would have to teach an 8th grader in order to get them to read the Iliad or something else. But yeah, I think it just depends on the school year.
Do you think? Yeah, I was gonna say, do you think that would be okay in 11th and 12th?
Oh heck yeah, they could do it.
Okay,
exactly. 100% do it.
Yeah, that's the issue with me is like, when it reaches to like upper high school, because a lot, at least here, it's gotten to that point where, like these things have reached from 3rd to like 12th. And it's like, okay, I think when you hit around like 16, I don't think it's inappropriate for anybody to learn about topics such as that or like the Holocaust or whatever. Like you kind of need to at some point. So
right,
yeah, because that's actually one thing that I always heard from teachers was there's just not enough time to teach everything, and it's like you have to be on, especially with what county standards are. It's like you have to get all the curricula done, and it's like you only have so much time, and there's never enough time. Especially because all students learn at different paces, and it's just a mess within itself. So I think when it comes to choosing what books people can read, I've always been out of the frame of mind that it's like, unless it's like kind of what everyone's been saying, unless it's pornographic or unnecessarily graphic, then it probably shouldn't be a book featured as curricula to learn from. But other books shouldn't be. I just think it's like the book, it fits the grade level based on what they know and what they can gain from it, because a book is given to a student to learn from so they can gain something from it. So if they're not at a level where they can gain anything from it, then why teach that book at that time? So that's kind of what the kind of standard I think should be when it comes to giving literature out to students is, what skill do the student currently possess, and what can they kind of gain from this piece of literature? And that's how the standard should be in terms of what's accessible.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. If a kid can't conceptualize anything that's happening in like a farewell to arms at age 11, fine. They shouldn't be able to. I'll give it to them when they're 18, then they'll probably understand it better. But yeah, if they can't get anything out of it, why would I give it to them? That's a waste of everybody's time.
Wrapping up this podcast, how would you think that banning a book impacts the notoriety of that book?
Makes me want to read it.
I'm in the same frame of mind. I'm like,
right, just because I want to know why.
Controversial.
That's it. Like I just wanted. It is notorious in a really fun way. Like even when I told them about Huckleberry Finn, I had no intention of teaching them that book. They were just asking about it because it was sitting on my desk and it was like this big because it was like one of those large font books. I have no idea where I got it. Well, the kids were like, "What is this?" I was like, "Oh, Huck Finn. It's banned. You're never gonna read it." No, the kids were like, "What?" I was like, "I mean, you'll read it when you're like 16." They're like, "Why is it banned?" And I was like, because I counted once, and I think he says the N-word like 480 something times. All the kids were like, "Can we read it?" And I was like, "No, we're not. No, you're not going to understand the book. Like, you gotta read Tom Sawyer first. We're not doing that.
I mean, I was reading when I was researching about this topic is like that authors themselves kind of see it as like a point of like pride of like, okay, my book's controversial. Like I think when it comes to controversial literature, it inspires interest in a sense of like, why is this so scary? Of like, why do people get worried about this kind of content so much? It pulls people in a sense. So I think that's kind of the notoriety that book banning kind of does.
What are each of y'all's favorite banned book, and what do you think the future of book bans looks like to you?
I mean, I don't necessarily have like a favorite banned book per se. I kind of just digest a lot of stuff that's within my major, like through academia. But like the progression of it, I mean, as of now, as long as the forces that are in power now maintain it, then I can see it being the continuous evolution of it just occurring. It's only been highlighted even further throughout the early 2020s, and we're just kind of getting started. So until like there's a transition of power and it leans toward a different ideological faction, then I don't know if it'll really subside until that like occurs.
Two books that are often banned that I kind of like, the one's The Kite Runner. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It's kind of a story about two boys growing up in Afghanistan, and it's very dark and things. I only read it as a book in high school, so I wouldn't say it's like something that should be anything for younger ages. But that and The Handmaid's Tale is often banned, or just kind of shied away from because of how graphic and dark it can be. But I think those are kind of very interesting because they kind of put a reality in place of things, even though it might be based in fiction or fictional tales. They talk about really dark ideas that are reality in some areas. So, but I think for the future of book banning, I would hope that we kind of come around and stop doing it in a sense. It's been a recent thing I think it really started kicking in 2021, and it's been a thing since. But I think the United States goes kind of when Devan was talking about the history of book banning. It's like we go through these periods based on socio-cultural events where we start censoring and hiding information. And I think that's kind of the point where we're at right now. And I'm hoping we can grow beyond that and really question, why are we doing this now? And why is it so important that this is a event happening within our society today? So I would hope that people adopt more kind of solutions that are more compromises instead of going to extremes. But I'm at least happy that it's a minority thing that's happening, and it's not becoming a nationwide kind of pandemic in the sense of let's censor information.
Like, I knew the Hunger Games was banned, but I didn't necessarily know why it was banned in the United States, other than the fact that it was like, oh, they're having an uprising against the government. That's really bad. And then I was like, it's not the children killing people in an arena that got the banned book? Because, like, okay. Like, it wasn't that. It was literally just the uprising of people being like, are you unhappy? Do you hate your government? You should kill them. And I was like, I mean, they keep saying eat the rich on Twitter. It's like the same thing. But, like, yeah, well, I found out that book was banned, so that's one of my favorite books to read. Not because it's banned, I just really like the book. And then because I said it 18 trillion times, I really also enjoy Huck Finn. It's my favorite banned book. It's my favorite American novel in general. But it's mostly because I appreciate how unbelievably satirical that book is. Like, Mark Twain is a hilarious writer. And if you read enough Mark Twain, then you know why that book is so funny. And I Googled it because I was curious, because I knew it couldn't just be banned because of the N-word usage. That was insane. So then I found this thing where I'm going to read it just because it says, it made me laugh, but it says the book was banned on the recommendation of public commissioners in Concord, Massachusetts, of all places, who described it as racist, coarse, trashy, inelegant, irreligious, I did not know that was a word. Obsolete, inaccurate, and mindless. But in terms of the future of banned books, I think it just kind of depends on who's reading the books. And so I have to think about who's having children to read those books. And it's going to be millennials in 10 years. If we ever get any money, we won't. So it won't be us. And then even if it's not millennials, it would be the generation below them. And since I teach those children now, I honestly don't think they're going to care about anything. If the world still exists by the time they start having children, or at least this country exists in the form that it exists in, I think there's going to be too many of them to absolutely just allow continuous bans to happen, because they're so curious and they know so many things about the world already. Like it's one of the things I admire the most about them. Like, if those are the people who are going to be having children, and then those are the people who are going to be deciding whether or not things are banned, I think we're going to be okay, but I might just be really optimistic.
I do think things are going to get more progressive just because of millennials and Gen Z, and then even be after that. That's my hypothesis, at least. And I work.
Truthfully, most of the government's like 60, so like eventually they're all going to retire or die, and then at that point, the only people around to replace them are going to be us, and it's going to be
things are getting more progressive as time elapses. Like the era of like the baby boomers in general is waning as we speak. So I think with millennials obviously leans more progressive, and I think Gen Z will as well, especially with the population of LGBTQ plus people within these subgroups. So like I think with the inclusivity of them, it will rise. I just think short term, at least, as long as we're like still kind of young, and like some of these people in their 50s, 40s, or 60s, 70s are in power. I think within the short term, it still should be a prevalent thing. But I do think like 30, 40 years from now, it should digress a little bit, at least.
As someone who is Gen Z, I think it's definitely prominent that there's less of a desire for filtering things, less of a desire to really look through things through rose-colored glasses. So I think that all the points of not thinking that banned books are going to be as prevalent in the future with the upcoming generations is definitely something to think about. That will be interesting to see in these upcoming years as millennials and Gen Z gain more power in society. On that note, be sure to follow our national conversation on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Spotify. Thanks for listening to our podcast, and be sure to check out the next episode of Allow Us to Explain, discussing the topics of unions.
This podcast was brought to you by Our National Conversation, a place where students generate policy solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Join us in freeing political dialogue from hyperpartisanship. To learn more about what you heard today, check us out at ournationalconversation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Our National Conversation to show your support and keep up with our latest efforts.